Hello, friends. How are you doing today? I don't know why I asked you that because you can't really respond. Hope you're doing good. This is Seth from Engage Podcast, one of the co-hosts here at Engage Podcast. Real quick, if you haven't, if you're just tuning in for the very first time, hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this, whether it be Apple, Spotify, Google, YouTube. Hit subscribe. That way you get notifications every time we come out with a new episode. Also, if you haven't checked out our YouTube channel, it's in the link below. You can go there. We have all kinds of good content, book reviews, sermon recordings. This podcast is also on there on every single Thursday. Just a lot of good content for you to grab and hear more from Faith Presbyterian Church. October is Pastor Appreciation Month. And what me and Pastor Anthony had, we had this idea back in the summertime. How cool would it be if we got 4 or 5 pastors on this podcast and just ask them personal questions about, how did they get into the ministry? Things like, what's your favorite book of the Bible? What's your favorite verse of the Bible? But even more personal, like, what does it take to be a pastor? And what's one surprising thing about being a pastor that the outside world just doesn't know about? So that's what you're currently listening to is this Pastor2Pastor mini-series that we're doing for Pastor Appreciation Month. And I can tell you personally that I'm very, very, very excited for this. And our guest is a amazing individual, and I'm not saying that just because he's a pastor and because he's a guest. I genuinely loved his presence here. He talks about the ministry of presence, and he did just that. His name is Reverend Kent Bell of Bethel Church or Bethel Ministries up in Greenville. I loved him, loved what he had to say. He was a fantastic guest, and you guys are in for an amazing episode of Pastor2Pastor. So give it up for our friend, Reverend Kent Bell.
Welcome back to our Engaged podcast. This is where we have our special edition, Pastor2Pastor. This is the month of October where we have a sit down with pastors and we talk with them, we learn about them, and hopefully you get to learn about not only the person we're sitting with, but also what it means to have a call in your life and to minister to a congregation in the broader community. Today we have the privilege of sitting with Reverend Kent Bell of Bethel Life, located in Greenville, Pennsylvania. How's it going, Kent?
It's going great, Pastor Anthony. Thank you for having me today. It's a joy to be here.
Nice to have you. Seth, what's going on?
I'm very glad to be here. It's a good morning so far.
So far, so good. You're sitting here with your Starbucks.
Yeah, I treated myself today. It's been a long time since I had Starbucks last.
Mm-hmm.
So,
is Starbucks one of the ways you treat yourself?
Yeah.
That's like a special echelon of coffee for you.
Yeah, I'm a latte guy, so every now and then when I can spend $6 on a coffee, that's where I go.
Kent, are you a Starbucks guy?
Not very often. I'm a pretty straight up black coffee drinker. I'm simple as it gets. Although I will have to say, Seth, occasionally I will treat myself to a caramel latte. So
they're so good.
Yeah, they're pretty good. But I really am. I'm a cowboy by heart, so it's campfire coffee, and let's go.
So the best part of waking up is Folgers in my cup.
Every morning. You got it.
I generally just go 99% of the time I'll just have a black coffee.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I like. Now when I was little, when I was introduced to coffee, there was the cream and sugar and all that stuff. And then I was like, okay, well, I don't need the sugar because the creamer already had flavor to it. So I thought that was pointless. And then I just started weaning out the creamer, but it was through the Starbucks, like a better quality coffee, at least in my opinion, I think it is. And I was like, you know what? I kind of actually like this. And so I just made a point where I deviated and said, I'm just going to go just drink it straight out. And I like it. I like it a lot. the best part of waking up is Starbucks in your cup. What can you say?
Well, I still say I'm going to sit in my back porch and I'm going to drink my black coffee. Although I will treat myself occasionally to a latte. My wife's that way. She loves frou-frou coffee is what I call it. Mm-hmm. She likes the frou-frou, so occasionally. Now, she makes a great iced coffee almost every evening for us. If I'm out working in the backyard, she'll bring one out to me, and I'll hammer that thing down.
Okay.
That's pretty good stuff.
So when you say cowboy coffee, do you mean like French press, or do you mean like the campfire? Like
No, just old, thick, black coffee.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Haven't cleaned the coffee pot in like 7 years.
Oh, please don't clean my coffee cup. That's the rule of my staff. Don't clean the coffee cup. That just ruins it.
Yeah, right. I like it. All right. Well, you're sitting here. I've known you for at least 4 years from being here in the Hermitage area. Tell the folks in the community and even the larger audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you so much. And again, for the privilege of being with you guys today. Well, first of all, I'm a native Texan. That's why the campfire coffee thing really kind of resonates with me. My granddad was a West Texas rancher, raised cotton, wheat, and cattle. But my dad was a minister, and so I grew up in a pastor's home. So my entire life was spent in the church, and that's never changed, and I'm thankful for that, thankful for those roots. I have 4 brothers. I actually have a twin brother, Kevin, and he's 6 minutes younger than I, so I hold that over him quite well. And but interesting enough, that little tidbit of information, he and I married girls with the same first name. So that's always interesting when we gather up around the house. But we moved to Greenville when I was in high school, and from Texas moved up into Pennsylvania, and that's where I met my wife. So I'm married. Denise and I'll be married 39 years. And right now we have 4 children. We have 2 biological children. Our son Jason is 37, and Jason's our special needs child. He has a condition known as Angelman syndrome, so he'll always live with us. We have a daughter. Our youngest biological daughter is in the York, PA area. Lauren's 30. And then we have 2 adopted daughters. They're kind of in the middle. They're both 34. One's in the Carolinas and has a 1-year-old. The other is in New Mexico with 3 children. So we've been at Bethel Life in Greenville now 21 years and serving the church. So it's a joy and privilege to be here. I had a 23-year career in both the retail and the wholesale grocery business. So prior to my stepping into the pastorate, I was in business. We've always been connected to and served the church. And I had the privilege also during that time to spend a little time here on the radio in Mercer County. So from 1987 to about 2003, I did some radio broadcasting. We covered high school football and high school wrestling. So some of those out there listening may remember me maybe from the wrestling side of things, but love the sport, love being on the radio, love serving the community.
Very cool.
Did you play any of those sports?
Well, I played some earlier, as a youngster and up to junior high. But when I got into high school, I was very involved with the youth group at the church and very involved with the church. So that oftentimes conflicted with that schedule. And then I also took a job. So between the job and the church really didn't allow me really the opportunity to play in high school. But coming back around, I love sports. I love, football. And learned and loved the sport of wrestling. And so just had a privilege to share that experience with the community. Loved it.
From the questions that we thought of and sent, Pastor, I know this is going to be rich, and there's going to be some questions that I piggyback off of. What led you into the pastorate? What was the transition for you? Or were you one of the people that kind of just knew when you were in high school, like, this is my only direction, I'm heading that way? Yeah,
it's kind of interesting that you asked that question, and I thought about that, Anthony, in preparation for today. And your last depiction of that is really where it came from me. I mean, I can remember looking back, and I've shared this actually with my congregation and with young people when I'm talking to young people today who are really trying to say, God, what do you have in store for my life? But I went back, and in our yearbook, when we were seniors, one of the things that they did was they had each of us write down, where do we want to go with our life? Where do we see ourselves going? And I, one day, just out of curiosity, wonder what I wrote. And I went back and opened the book and looked, and there it said, I see myself as a minister.
When was this?
That was when I was in high school. I was a graduating senior.
Wow.
I think I knew before that because really, even in our youth group, We had a pretty substantial youth group back in the day, and we were together a lot. But myself and one other individual in the group were really kind of the core leaders of the group, if you will, and just loved being in the church, following the heart of God, and helping others know Christ.
So I heard you say a few things that just they stood out to me, and I want to explore a little bit. The first is, and Seth, you can identify with this. Mm-hmm. You mentioned you're a PK, and for those out there, right? It was only now my experience was I wasn't raised in the church, so when people use like slang terms in the church or any field they're in, it takes people a while to figure out what that means. So PK means
pastor's kid.
That's right, and MK was missionary's kid, and so you're a PK, right? Seth, you're a PK.
Yes, sir.
What was that like for you? I guess here's why I'm asking this. When I went to, I embraced Christ when I was a senior in high school. So it was like he hit me with a ton of bricks. He set my life in a new direction. I went to a Bible college, and I met a bunch of PKs there. And I noticed that it was either they were like obedient and loved Jesus, or they were rebellious. What is it? Why? First of all, why is that you see that polarizing effect? And then secondly, what did your family do right? Or what would you suggest another pastor to do? I'm asking for a friend with their kids.
Yeah, so why the differences? I think that is diverse as just who people are. Because even I know within the context of my own family unit, and there were 4 boys in our family, we're all very different. And so the path that I chose in life, as an example, is a very different path than even a younger brother of mine, per se, chose. And so he spent a little bit of his time in some rebellious years. I have a very good friend of mine that's a little older than I am, grew up in the church. His dad's a pastor. He's today actually a bishop within our movement and a powerful man of God. But he certainly went through his time of rebellion. For me, personally, it was my personal relationship with the Lord, and then my desire at the time just to be connected and serve in the church. My mom and dad were very faithful. One of the things that they taught us always to put the Lord first in our life in every aspect, and they modeled that for us. And my dad was a very kind and compassionate person. And so they invested in us. I think the biggest thing and mistake sometimes we make in the church, and I know that's kind of fleshed out a little bit in our conversation this morning, but there's times when as a minister or a leader, you don't put enough emphasis on the family. And so maybe at times there's resentment because you weren't there for me when I needed you. So my dad was careful not to ever allow that to happen.
So I have to ask this. Why, and I hear this all the time, and that same word with resentment from the pastor's kids that are kind of rebellious. They're very resentful towards the church a lot of times. Why is it that pastors have to be mindful of balancing the family life and the church life?
Well, I think for me personally, the first thing is to recognize there's just a priority that we need to establish in our lives. And the number one thing is, of course, even being a pastor, and I know, Anthony, you could probably attest to this, being a pastor doesn't make you necessarily a good disciple, follower of Christ. You have to purpose to do that first and foremost every day, is that maintain that relationship with God, that personal, intimate relationship with Him every day. That's number one. And then I think it's also setting the right priorities and understanding that my first call is not only to serve my Lord, but then my second call is my wife. My wife becomes then the number one priority, along with my vertical relationship with the Lord. The next thing in my life needs to be my relationship with her, and then my family, and then comes the church. When we keep those things in that order, in the proper order, and that's not always easy, you and I both know that, but when we do that, then that breeds a very healthy family, which in turns, hopefully a healthy church, because you've modeled that for everyone. When we get that out of order, even at times our ministry can even become more significant than our personal relationship with the Lord. But certainly when it takes the place of our family and they get pushed down the line, there's naturally going to be some resentment there. And it's just not in God's order, in my opinion. And so when we keep those in order, it helps.
I have found that whether it's my experience or hearing other pastors hearing about other churches, that most pastors, 99%, would say exactly and agree exactly with what you said. I agree with that. I've also found that the church itself, large C, church in general, would sit down and say, yes, that's what we want from you. Keep that order. But then once reality hits and you start working there and ministering there, there's an eagerness, and the churches are very quick to have that pushed to the side, and they come first. One of the things that I did when I was going through my interview process here, they asked me the question, how do you balance work life and family life? And I said, as a pastor, you don't balance those things. You have to set your priorities first. And so there's times you're going to hear me say no. And they were kind of shocked by that. And I explained to them that the church, for however many people you see sitting in the pews, are people that want and need you. And for somebody, there's always a crisis, whether it's a real crisis or not. It's a perceived crisis. And I explained to them, I say, think about on a Sunday morning, close your eyes, and in your mind's eye, look around. For every person that's there, that's like an extended family.
Sure.
So if you're sitting in your house and you have a family of 3 and they grow up and have kids, and you're trying to just simply have a job and minister to them just in general, not being a pastor, that's a lot of stress, because everyone comes with their own baggage, who's going through this, who's going through that. In my mind, the church is an extended family. So imagine if you're going through life and there's a ton of stress just in your little circle. Now multiply that times however many people are sitting in your congregation. I have noticed that the church they don't realize that, there's the phone call, there's the email, there's the ring at the doorbell, but now because of social media, there's the text, there's the Facebook Messenger, and you're getting hit with those things. And unfortunately, sometimes they're really heavy, and people don't have a tendency to see that. So I guess my point is I hear what you're saying, but I have found in pastors' lives that churches tend to want to flip that once the ministry starts, and I'm just hesitant of that, because I have seen the damage that has done to pastors' families. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like I took a shortcut through Alaska to get to the point.
Well, you did a good job.
Did I?
I
Did
appreciate
that make sense?
that. Yeah, absolutely makes sense.
Oh, good. Okay.
You do what I do, which is that's exactly how I explain everything. Is I take the long way to get to it.
You take the long way.
But I enjoy it, so yeah.
And that made sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess I'm saying that because if there's folks listening, this is Pastor Appreciation Month. If I'm wrong, say I'm wrong. One of the ways that a church can honor their pastor is, a lot of times it's not, a bonus, but sometimes it's, hey, a surprise, some surprise time off for you to spend with your family.
I appreciate that. It makes a lot of sense. And I know for me, one of the things that Denise and I have done, my wife Denise, and I said we've been married 39 years, that we are intentional about some things today. Now, we weren't always that way. We've had to learn some things, and that's what happens as you get a little older. You've had experience, and so you learn some things. So when I speak to young couples today, whether they're in ministry or just with their job and their career, one of the things that I talk to them about is setting those priorities in order and being intentional about them. Because you and I both know that life kind of can take on its own and consume you. Mm-hmm. And next thing you know, the things that you really have said are important have gotten pushed to the bottom of the stack. So we do some things like, for us, Mondays are our day. Mm-hmm. We kind of set aside Monday. It's for us, the weekend is not, because of the variety of things the church is doing throughout a weekend, including our worship services on Sunday. And then, of course, staff meetings throughout the week and the things that you're doing to help minister and speak into the lives of people. But we take Monday, and that becomes our day. So we have some habits and things that we do. We get our son off to his day program. And another thing that kind of has impacted our lives is our son is in our lives, and he's always going to be there. And Jason, with his condition, it takes 24/7 care. So that's another factor in our home. So we have to be extremely intentional about some things. So for us, it's making sure that we have that time on a Monday. We always go out to breakfast, and then we plan our day around some things that she enjoys. And sometimes it may be just back at the house to do some work projects around the home, but we're in our domain. We're in our place of peace. And so that's become very important for us. But I had a guy say to me years ago, he said, one of the things, and he was a former pastor and now a bishop, a overseer of a variety of churches, and he gave me a little thing to consider. He said, listen, you need to be healthy in your life and in your ministry and with your relationship. He said, you need to divert daily. Find that time throughout your day to carve out some time for yourself. Divert daily, withdraw weekly, and abandon annually.
You got to write that down.
Yeah, and what he meant by
say that one more time.
You have to divert daily, you have to withdraw weekly, and then you have to abandon annually. And what that meant to me was, for me, that diverting daily for me is my quiet time in the morning. I love to get up early in the morning, and I love to get alone and quiet by myself with my cowboy coffee, and I like to just spend time with the Lord in that moment, and that's that moment for me. And then withdrawing weekly is that time I'm spending with my wife. And of course, we do things daily, so don't get me wrong, but that withdrawing weekly is that moment. That's my Monday. That's my protected day, and our congregation knows that.
Mm-hmm. So you explain that.
We explain
that. There's safeguards around this day, unless there's, an emergency.
Yeah. And
right.
That's always interesting because, as I think we understand, people's emergency and their crisis is always
a hangnail.
It's okay until it's about me, but I will say this at Bethel, they really do it at our ministry. They get that, and for the most part, they respect that well. Mm-hmm. And our staff is very good about that. So that's our weekly withdrawal. But the abandon annually is the need to get away. I mean, to really just disconnect. For my wife and I, one of the things that we've enjoyed in the last few years is, we'll go to Pigeon Forge, get a cabin up on the mountain somewhere. It's just the two of us. We get alone. We do some quiet things. We don't even plan a lot of activity, which you could in a place like that. We just get quiet. We just take a night or two and go somewhere to see a show.
It's your way of unplugging.
It's unplugging.
You got to get away. You can't see the community. You can't see the church. You can't drive by with your big Texas hat on and wave at Pastor Anthony at Faith Presbyterian Church. You don't want to see any of it, right?
Right. You just really need to abandon everything and just have that moment. And I follow a guy that's been an influence in my life. Although, and I say that not direct, but indirectly an influence in my life is a guy by the name of Robert Morris. And Robert, out of Gateway in Dallas, Texas, mega ministry today, started in 2000 with about 150 people. Ministry today that's multi-campuses and probably close to 50,000. But he wrote a book because he talks about as the church began to grow and how he did not put these safeguards in place. They were running hot. They were running hard. God was doing things. The church was growing. But he had personally abandoned the principle of the Sabbath day rest. And he got to a moment in his life where literally his wife Debbie was out at a conference speaking to women. He had just returned home from a trip, getting ready, and got into his closet, opened his dresser drawer, and there were no socks in his dresser drawer, no clean socks. And it had gotten to the place where emotionally he was so spent, and this might sound crazy to people, but he literally sat down in his closet and cried because he had not a pair of socks. It was like Walmart down the street, and the man could afford to go buy socks. But he learned the principle of the Sabbath rest, and God began to teach him some things through that. So he's very strategic in his time now about protecting himself and his family and how important that is.
So there are people listening who may not be a churchgoer.
Sure.
That may say to themselves, yeah, sure, I'm busy too. What is it about church ministry or being a pastor that the average person may be surprised to learn about? What is it about the ministry that makes it unique?
Pastor Anthony, I think one of the things that makes pastoring so unique is, first of all, biblically speaking, from my perspective, we see a pastor in more of the role of a shepherd, a caregiver, a watcher, one who leads his people, make sure they're fed frequently and regularly and cared for. And I have a friend of mine who is a CPA and a good friend of mine, and so we funnel around a lot, and he would razz me from time to time. You preachers have it easy. He said, you know what's coming now. You work one day a week. And I said, well, at least I work all year. You CPAs work 3 months out of the year. Then you're off for 9, because of the tax season. Of course, that got extended this year. But we just used to fun back and forth. But I said, it's interesting. When you think about the role of a pastor, it's not just the preaching on a Sunday morning that people visibly see. It's all of the other elements of that come into the role as a shepherd. And I was thinking about this, and I thought about a scripture where Paul said in 1 Corinthians 9:22, he said, I become all things to all men, that some might be saved. And when I thought about that, the work that God has called us to is so much more than preaching. There's days when I have to put on my PhD in counseling to really minister to someone where they're at today, which I don't have a PhD in counseling. I have to put on my master's degree of finance. I have to put on my degree in social work and law. I have to have general knowledge of plumbing and electrical and automotive. And by the way, we also have a moving business. I don't know if you knew that in the church. We move people frequently. I'm teasing, but I mean, it happens. People call you up, and they're like,
that's the one thing.
I understood. My dad has a truck. Trust me.
We have a truck and a trailer, so we naturally have a moving ministry.
Yep.
In fact, I had a lady call the church one day, and our secretary answered the phone and said, "Can I help you?" She says, "Yes, I was told that Bethel Life has a moving ministry." And she was serious as could be. And
well, you do realize after this airs in October what's going to happen?
Yeah, they're going to be calling Pastor Anthony the moving ministry that you have. But I'll never forget, it's that diverse in scope because, when you love people as a pastor does, and you have a shepherd's heart, your idea, you want to care for people. Mm-hmm. And I've often said this about my role. I want to love people and meet people just like Jesus did. And my image of Christ is always he met people at their deepest need. Mm-hmm. Whatever the need was, he was there to meet them. And so we have to wear many hats, and some which we just feel completely ill-equipped. So what I have to do today is obviously be willing to surround myself with people or know people who I can also say, hey, this is my heart, and I want to pray for you. But here I want to connect you with, this individual. I remember I had a friend of mine many years ago. In fact, he's still with us today. He had moved in from out of state. A young man who's been in ministry his whole life. He's a worship leader. He's an evangelist. He's an international evangelist, and he's very skilled. But he had moved to Greenville from actually Scottsdale, Arizona, to be with us. And he was here only a couple of weeks, and we were doing some things. And sitting in my office one day, and all of a sudden I heard a woman just sobbing uncontrollably. So immediately I'm up out of my desk, I walk down the hall, and I can see a woman standing at the end of the hall in front of our secretarial office, and she's standing there, has her hands cupped like this, and she's just sobbing uncontrollably. And I came out of my office, he comes out of his office, I walk down the office, get to the end of the hallway, and I looked, and she's holding a tiny little puppy in her hand. And the puppy was deceased. And she just can't even communicate or share a word with me. So I reach out my hands, and I just go like this, and she places this puppy in my hands. And I said, what happened? She said, well, my dog had a litter of pups, and this one didn't make it. And, this woman had gotten this puppy, driven to the church, and walked in the door. Now, I don't know what all emotionally is going on with her in her mind. Mm-hmm. All I can do is respond to the moment. So I said to her, well, we'll take care of him, I promise. Mm-hmm. So she walks out the door, better shape, composed, and leaves. Mm-hmm. He looks at me and goes, what are you doing? I said, I'm pasturing the flock.
That's exactly.
He says, well, what are you going to do with that dog? And I said, I'm going to go bury the dog. He said, well, just throw it in the dumpster. She'll never know. And I said, but I will. Mm-hmm. Mm. And my comfort to her was, I'm going to take care of this puppy for you. So it's the variety of hats and things that you get drawn into that you have no knowledge of.
It's emotionally, like there's days where I'm working outside and I'm sweating, but I feel like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm like, I feel amazing. But you do that kind of stuff, right? And here's the thing about the puppy story. You can sit here and for the next 2 hours tell one after the other after the
Absolutely.
other. It's emotionally taxing and draining.
Yeah. That was a puppy. There's the time I showed up at the ER because I knew that a member of my own staff, her stepdaughter, had been killed in a car wreck, and she didn't know. And I had to walk in the hospital, not only tell her that, but walk to the morgue and identify the 17-year-old daughter. And those are the things that people don't always see,
Right.
that a pastor's engaged in, because a pastor really shares life with you.
Exactly.
So,
Before we get in your question, this is just so rich that we knew that coming in.
yeah.
My experience, not growing up in the church, my senior year, I alluded to that. Pastor Dave, he was our youth pastor, and he had a huge impact on not only me, but a group of seniors. And he would have something after youth group at his house. It was called D group. It was discussion. It was an excuse just to get the guys together and girls and have pizza and build relationships. It was all new to me. Now, this was after youth group, so we're looking at, I don't know, by this time, it's 9:30, 10 o'clock. I mean, it's late, right? And I will never forget, and as we're sitting here, Pastor Kent's, his phone keeps on flashing, which is just another example, right? And his phone rings, and he gets up, he walks into the kitchen, and I hear him kind of talking low, and he goes, okay. Hangs the phone up. Doesn't say a word. Now, he's in shorts and a T-shirt and pizza, and I see him walk upstairs. He didn't say anything to us, but I watched him. And he came downstairs in khakis and a polo. He said, I have to go. Like, well, where are you going? Where are you going? He said, so-and-so's passing away. I have to go to the hospital. Mm-hmm. No one else I'm like, okay. But for me, that was extremely weird because I grew up in a house where Dad left for work, came home from work, and when Dad came home from work...
He was home from work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was like, that's not the only guy. This is the only person that this is happening to. So this is just another element that you have these plans in a second. You walk in a church and there's a lady with a puppy. Or you get a phone call, so-and-so's passing. Anyway, go ahead, Seth.
Oh, I was just going to say, so in your best guess, what's the most rewarding thing for you about being a pastor? Is it those intimate moments that you have with people where you're able to meet their deepest need, or is it something more than that?
Yeah, I think that there's probably a couple things there. I love being able to help someone who has been lost and help them find their way and see them then empowered by the freedom that I know that Christ and His Word will bring them when they truly surrender to Him and His Word. It's rewarding to help them then walk that journey of fulfilling their purpose and destiny in life. We all have significance in God's eyes, so that's also very rewarding for me. But also having the opportunity, Seth, to be a part of people's lives in not only the happy moments when they're celebrating the birth of a child or the wedding of a child, which we did just last weekend. I got to marry a couple that grew up in the church, both the young man and the young girl, and to be a part of that's a very special thing. But then there's those very intimate moments when they're at a very difficult stage of life, and knowing that you being there, and you don't always have to have the right thing to say. In fact, most of the time you may not be, or might not have the right thing to say, but in those moments when it's very difficult for them, just knowing you're being there for them speaks to them and speaks volumes to them at that moment. I think those moments are as rich for me as the things that we celebrate. And the privilege that God has given me, or you, or whoever's called to be in this role, the gift to be there for them. And I think that's invaluable as well.
Very cool. Very cool. I always think whenever, my dad put it perfectly once when I was like, when you go to a hospital and someone has either died and you're there with the family, like, what do you say to them? Like, because I'm putting myself in his shoes. Like, I don't know what I would say. And my dad said, I'm comforted when I read John 11. And Jesus has the wisdom to know how Mary and Martha deal with grief. He gives truth to one, but he just cries with the other. He's like, sometimes it doesn't matter what you say. They just want someone to cry with them. And I'm like, wow, that's powerful. But then I think that's, for him, being a pastor, I think that's one of the things that he gets the most out of ministry too, is just being there for people. And sharing those moments. That's really cool.
Yeah, I think the key there, sometimes we overthink and I don't mean this like it may sound, but almost sometimes we over spiritualize things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when really Jesus is all about relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just being there for people.
Mm-hmm.
To echo your story, there's a little story out there about the little 3-year-old girl and her mom that lived next door to the older gentleman, and his wife had passed. And she looked over one day, and the little girl was sitting out there on the front porch with him, and the two of them were just rocking in the chair. And she came back home and said, "What have you been doing?" And she said, "I was just sitting there helping him cry." Mm-hmm. And just the compassion and heart and the wisdom from a 3-year-old. But it's that same element. Sometimes you don't have to say anything, but just knowing you're willing to be there is what's most important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I call it the gift of presence.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we think we have to be talking all the time.
Right.
And more times than not, in those moments, they're not going to really be able to digest and hear what you're telling them and all the theology and doctrine you're trying to download into them at that moment. They're not going to remember it. It's just not the right time. But it's being there for them and comforting them and praying just a very heartfelt, genuine prayer over the family is what makes the most significance in their lives at the time.
Yes.
Very
I
cool.
found that to be true, too. And it's funny because, if you go in there and try to say a bunch and it doesn't work out, and there's times where you go in there with the ministry of presence, right?
That's it.
But the people will circle back sometimes and say, "I really appreciate you being there," and the words.
Yeah.
And I always say to myself, I don't remember what I said. I don't think it was much. It must have been profound, but right? It's your presence being there.
It's the
They
gift
care.
of presence and what God wants to do through you. One of the things that I pray with my congregation often is I pray this prayer that God help me to be, and I pray that for everyone, help me to be a channel of your grace, just to be an open channel of your grace to those around us. Mm-hmm. That's key.
I like that vision, a channel of grace. Yes.
Very cool.
So you've been in ministry how long?
Well, I've really been involved in the ministry in the church all my life, but as far as stepping away from my secular job, I did that 18 years ago. I stepped away from my secular job. Been involved with the church here now where I'm at 21 years.
21 years.
Serving the church, engaged in the church, and then stepped away in 2002 and stepped into the full-time pastorate in 2003 as far as leading the church.
In your experience of ministry, what are the two most important, and I just put a number to it because we could put 10, 20. What are the two most important qualities when pastoring a church?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to have a servant's heart. You have to be in this for the right reason. Servant's heart and I think humility are the two things that go hand in hand. Of course, I think aside from those things, a character trait that we all have to have is integrity. Mm-hmm. So when I think about the role of a pastor, because people are watching, it's important that you are willing to serve the people. One of the things I really have, and there's a lot of teachings out there on leadership in the church and all those things, but I still, you can't get away from who Jesus was, and he was the servant of all. So you serve the people. When you willingly serve them, it's a standard that Christ set for us. So that, and you serve out of humility. And obviously at the top of the list then in the ministry itself, you want your ministry and your life to reflect Christ. So integrity is so critical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's interesting about those two qualities are they start with the pastor. I mean, I know it starts from Jesus, but just practically, that's where all great leadership starts, is looking at yourself, right?
Absolutely.
It wasn't being a great speaker. It was leading yourself and having the right mindset and heart with the servant's heart and being a person of integrity. I like those answers.
Yeah, I think if people are going to follow you, they want to follow someone that they trust.
Right.
They want to follow someone that walks in humility. And when they can trust you and they know you have their best interest in heart and you're not out for some other motivation or gain in what you're doing, then I think that's a great foundation because people will follow that.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you define success in ministry? Because that's another thing too that a lot of people I think don't necessarily understand about church life is how Christians should define success in ministry.
Yeah, I think that over the years in the church, and we've just had this conversation recently with, I've got a young person right now that's been with us that has been doing an internship, and I was talking to her, and I said, I think probably in the church, the greatest injustice the church has done, maybe even in larger denominational levels, is that we've measured success the wrong way. And oftentimes we want to measure success on, this Sunday, how many were in attendance and what was the offering. That's kind of the standard across America. How do we measure success? And the reality is success can and should be measured by how many lives are being impacted by the love of Christ. We have a scripture that I use to kind of cast vision for the church that's been very consistent now for the past 18 years. And out of Colossians chapter 1, verse 6, the Apostle Paul will say this, and I'm going to paraphrase it for you, but it says simply, all over the world, the gospel is growing and bearing fruit by changing lives. So the measure of success for me is not comparing people, but are we seeing lives change? Have we introduced Christ? Did we continue to minister and disciple the word in them so that they take that, ingest it, apply it, and their life be changed? Are we creating people who then can also reach out and share Christ? And so that's what I'm saying. Are people being set free from the things of this world? So when you look at Jesus' model of ministry in Luke chapter 4, when he entered the synagogue, he said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to, and he gives a list of things: to heal the brokenhearted, to set at liberty those who are held in bondage or captivity, to open the eyes of the blind, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. So are we doing that? Are we seeing people's lives altered and changed because we, the church, have met them where they're at?
That's really great. I commend you for that. It's important as the pastor to set that standard because definitions mean something, and whatever their definition is has to match your definition, but then your definition should match ultimately the scriptures. Colossians 1:6, that's a great verse. Translating that into a story I read through a book called Creating Magic, I think it's called, by Lee Cockerell or something like that. Anyway, he was the CEO of Disney for years. And he tells a cool story. He says that he was walking through the park one day, and there was one of the workers that walked by scraps of paper, or it was garbage someone had thrown on the ground. And he stopped them and he asked, "Why didn't you pick that paper up?" And they said, "I'm not a janitor. It's not my job." And he said, "Your job at Disney is to create a wonderful place where people can come and enjoy themselves." And what he did in that moment is he redefined their job. This is what your job here. So if I come to Disney and I'm working at Disney, no matter who I am, whether I'm serving food, I'm the CEO, if my job is to create an environment for people to come and enjoy themselves, then when I see the garbage on the ground, I pick it up. And so what I like about what you're saying is you're creating an environment where the love of Christ becomes the goal and spreading the gospel. That's powerful, right? Versus how many people showed up at church on Sunday.
Right. So. Most of the ministry that we do today doesn't take place on Sunday morning. I was talking with a friend of mine here a couple months ago, and he's out on the West Coast, and their focus of ministry is not on, and I'll just use the 1 hour mark. That's not necessarily how long a service is, but let's just call it 1 hour. And for them, they no longer focus on that 1 hour, which is what many churches have done. They focus on that main Sunday morning experience, but their emphasis is on the 167. What are we doing 167 hours in the week?
That's cool.
Not the one, because so much of church has revolved around
the 1 hour.
That 1 hour experience. And one of the things that maybe has caused the church in America to become less impactful over the years than it has been is that we've created church under a model that we like. And I've heard it defined like this: it becomes what's known as the sin of preference. This is what I prefer. So this is the time I prefer to worship. This is the type of music I like to sing. This is where I prefer to sit. And it could be I prefer to sit on a pew, or I prefer to sit on a chair. But we have created these preferences within the context of church that really have no place in the church. When we understand the motive behind why we do what we do is to love Jesus and help people do the same. It's that simple. And so when we do that, we will be willing to set aside some of our preferences to reach people.
It's very good. So if to get to, I think that answered one of our questions. If you had the opportunity to give one tip or one message to every church in, let's just say America, is that the message you would give them is stop looking at numerical success as stop looking at the numbers as your point of success, and look at the love of Jesus as the success, and church is not about that 1 hour, it's about all the other hours.
Yeah, I definitely think church is really, it's not the building we come to gather to worship in. Church is the body of Christ. We see that in Scripture, right? Jesus is the head, we're the bride, or we're the body of Christ. So it's what we do as the body of Christ to engage people every single day. Even when Jesus himself was asked, what's the greatest commandment? Well, he said very simply, love God, love people. And so when we love people as Christ did, then that's when we're really going to effectively see change in our communities. And each one of us can change and affect the community we live in and where God has called us to. And of course, there's international missions. We do a lot of that and those things as well. But when I focus on what God has called me to do, Pastor Anthony, you focus on what God has called you to do. Together, that's how the church will globally impact change across our nation.
I think it was Tony Evans who said the mark of a successful church is not how much money they bring in or how many butts are in the seats, but it's how the neighborhood that surrounds the church is doing. If the neighborhood around the church is doing good, that's a reflection of what the church is doing. That they're not just coming just to hear a sermon. They're actually going out and helping other people. They're helping to rebuild houses and help to build from the inside out, the community that's around them.
Yeah, Seth, I heard it said like this one time. It just kind of made me stop and think. But if your church would cease to exist tomorrow, would the community notice?
There you go.
It's powerful.
Yeah. All right. So you've been at Greenville here for 21 years. Well, years ago, you were bushy-tailed and bright-eyed, and you still kind of are now, right?
Well,
you drove up here.
I'm getting up there. I drove up here in my wife's car, by the way, just so you know. Borrowed the car.
T-top. I don't know what that was.
Yeah.
What's something that you wish you had learned back in seminary or Bible college?
Well, I would probably, and I thought about that question in preparing for today. And, my path and journey to where I'm at today is a little bit different maybe than some who felt a call to ministry, went right out of high school or college into, either Bible college or seminary, and then came out of that into the full-time ministry. I've really been in some ways connected to ministry my whole life, but my position shifted significantly when I was about 41 years of age. And I had the privilege in the background to be involved in the business world, which I like, administration. That's kind of one of my natural giftings. So having said that, there's been a lot that even in my former job, aside from college, taught me, if you will, that I am now implementing and have in my leadership at the church. But if there's one thing that I think that whether it's Bible college or whatever it is that prepares you to step in that moment, I think how to embrace and teach leadership principles and to lead leaders in the church would be the one thing that I would point to. I think for many, I think obviously if you're coming right out of Bible college or seminary and you've never had that kind of experience of the 20 plus years that I had, I think church administration has to be taught some of the things we've already talked about, how to keep things in proper perspective and minister first to family and then to congregation. But for me, where I was at, I would say probably how to better equip myself to teach and train others, leaders who come alongside, because our church has evolved. And, when you're a church of certain sizes, yeah, you can pretty much have a handle on everything. You can be a part of, and people like that. But when you start growing, the tension there, as your church is growing larger, is how to continue to be effective, meet people's needs, but now really begin to empower leaders to do their job and to do it well. And when I say job, the ministry that God has called them to. So I think probably for me, how to be and teach leadership.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm not going to get into all that right now, but I could not agree more. I have a couple more questions.
Sure.
One is from something that you said earlier. being at Bethel for 21 years, and this isn't here. In my experience going in the ministry, if you would have asked me, like graduating, never had worked in a church, what are you looking forward to the most? I would have said something like preaching every week, and teaching the Bible and leading Bible studies and doing things like that. But over time, those things I still enjoy, but other things have come up right alongside of them in terms of things that I enjoy. Walking hand in hand with somebody that I first met was in youth group, and then is in college, and then is years later serving as an elder, and then standing in front of him and his wife doing the wedding. And that was through being at a church, one church, for many years. I would have never looked down the corridor of time and said to myself, yeah, one of the greatest blessings is to be somewhere as a pastor for a long tenure, right? You've been here for 21 years. How has ministry changed for you? What things did you start looking at in the beginning? You had an eye on, this is what ministry's like, but over time it's changed for you. How's that happened in your life?
Wow. Yeah. So, first of all, it's kind of interesting. People, and we're all wired differently, So for me, it was never a burning desire to preach on Sunday morning. Oddly enough, I know there's pastors that's their primary thing. They just can't wait to get in the pulpit and preach. Do I enjoy that? Sure. But that was never my burning desire. Again, my background is more in the area of administration, and I like administrating. I like really seeing the church grow. But I think for me, what I've looked at today in comparison to where we were 21 years ago, a little history there, if I could, for just a second. Our church has been around in the Greenville community for a little over 100 years. Okay, so there's longevity for our church in that congregation or in that community. But for the first 80 years, it remained a somewhat smaller church, still a really good and effective church. But in 1999, the church experienced a fire that destroyed the building. Okay, a building that was built back in the late 1920s. And actually my wife's family, her grandfather, was a part of that early church and even the physical building of that. And fire destroyed the church. So out of that came really a church plant, because we had to start from scratch. And the demographics of the church and even the vision of the church changed dramatically between the years of 2000 and to where I stepped into the pulpit in 2003. I think what changed that I didn't see happening was the diversity of what we're doing today. What we're doing today, and I've had these conversations with my dad. My dad will have just turned 78. And I said, Dad, is ministry today, because he gets to sit he's here now, he's retired, he's here, he's hanging close. And
he sits in the congregation when you preach?
Oh yeah, he's part of what we're doing. And in fact, I affectionately call him Pastor Dad. He calls me Pastor Son, so it's just kind of a running joke. Everybody else calls him Papa Bell. So he's just really kind of the presence there, and he's a very compassionate man, so it's great having him there. But ministry is so different today than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. But I see the diversity that we have and the ability we have today to impact our community in ways that we never thought of before. So we have a special needs ministry called Loving Hands. Today we do a special needs prom always in February that has a huge imprint on our community now. We have a life center in the community that is independent of the church but is sanctioned and functions under the umbrella of the church, that is reaching out to people who are struggling with addiction or depression or whatever. It's just and we're in partnership now working with some county agencies. There's just so much today that we're able to do that's not focused on Sunday morning.
Right. And so, and to your point about
cool.
the importance of leadership being taught, managerial skills, if we were to get into a time capsule and go back in time, simpler times meant simpler ministry in a way.
Sure.
That's where it was. The expectations of the congregation is, hey, I want the pastor to, hey, show up, preach a good sermon, marry me, bury me, baptize my kid.
Yeah.
And not that was insignificant. It is significant, but in a much more complex world, I think the calling of the pastor, whether it's right or wrong, becomes much more entrepreneurial. you're wearing all these different hats.
You're wearing a tremendous different amount of hats today, and just where we are culturally, as you're describing, Anthony, the some of, and I say this cautiously, but the dysfunction in the core of a family unit today is so different and diverse than what it was, 30 and 40 years ago. And then in the middle of all that, we throw in this whole thing with social media today. And if I'm really going to connect with younger generations today, forget Facebook. They don't Facebook. I've got to know how to Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok. I don't even know some of this stuff is, but I've got staff members who will help me with this stuff. But how do you communicate to the 20-somethings today? You try to learn all these things because it's such a diverse culture that we're living in. But they're tools. And the other thing is we can't dismiss them because they're tools. They're very different tools today we use. But we have an opportunity to touch them where they're at.
Yeah. I have one more question. Was that all right, Seth?
It's fine with me.
All right. I always got to give Seth, I got to look at him every once in a while. Sometimes he'll give me the stink eye. It's Pastor Appreciation Month, Seth. You got to be nice to me.
I'm being very nice to you.
Okay. Last question is this. You are walking out of seminary into your first call.
Sure.
All right? You walk up to yourself in the parking lot. What do you say to you?
What do I say to me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is not going to be a lot of revelation, but one of the things that I'm first going to say to myself is, remember who I represent. This is not about me.
Very good.
This is not about me. This is about the privilege that I have been given to represent my Lord. And if I will filter everything I do in life, if I will filter how I speak to people, if I will filter how I minister them through that lens, then it will probably go well for me.
I think that's a great way to end our conversation. I want to say thank you for coming out today.
Yeah,
I know you're a busy man.
Yep.
This is Pastor Appreciation Month, and this is our limited edition series here in Engage Podcast, Pastor to Pastor. I trust that you have been blessed and encouraged by Reverend Kent Bell. Kent, remind us again where your church is.
We have two locations, actually. Our main campus is there in Greenville. We're at 246 South Mercer Street, right there in Greenville. And then about 2.5 years now, we've been right down here in the valley, not far from here. We have a location over on Clarksville Road, 655 Clarksville Road, and my nephew Andrew Bell's our campus pastor there. So we're excited about what God's doing there. So good things.
What time is worship?
Well, in Greenville campus right now, we're a 10 a.m. service start, and we're 11 o'clock in Hermitage.
Okay. Well, if you're inspired today, go out and check them out. They'll be there every Sunday, same place, same time. This is Anthony Claudius, Pastor of Faith, signing off.
And Seth Walters.
God bless.
Yep.